Here's Beth. That's great.
Glad I made it.
I'm gonna read the-
Pennsylvania.
There you go.
It was very nice, I have to say.
Nobody stood up and said, I object.
Nobody said I apologize for the delay. Best.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Beth.
I'll tell you after.
So we're going to conduct this meeting in hybrid format. Under current state law, public bodies may continue holding hybrid and fully remote meetings without a quorum of the public body physically present, as long as adequate alternative access is provided. Information about how to join a hybrid or fully remote hearing will be included in the required open meeting law posting, as it was. Our first order of business on this particular day was to have any resident comments, and that is, unless Chris has some comments.
Hi, Beth and Chris Larrabee of the West Observer. We spoke on the phone, a couple months ago for Bob Buchanan.
Oh, yeah,
So, good to put a face to the name. I'm just gonna be putting together a story on the town meeting study committee. What happens in the meeting here isn't really super of note for the story. I'm just want to highlight issues for people, let people know who's working on this and, next steps sort of thing. Pretty straightforward. Yeah.
High level, I refer you to the warrant article in the last warrant, which describes what it is that we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
And I'm not so sure
I'll
how,
find it online.
Okay.
But thank
to what level of detail we're gonna follow that specific rubric, but
You might forward to him the 3 or 4 things that you forwarded
I'm
us at
happy
the
to do
beginning.
Sure.
Yeah, and that way he'll have all the background from the MMA and perfect stuff.
there's a great deal of work that others have done in the last several years that we're gonna try to build on and not to recreate too much of that process and conversation. But we all have our own opinions here, and that's why we're on this committee. We also have a town that has townspeople who have opinions. Many of them would like to express those opinions. And I think that the last meeting we had was, we invited Dave Bernstein to show up. You probably run into Dave.
I'm not.
He's a guy from Wayland on their Elvis committee, and he's their electronic voting person.
Okay.
They have been very active in trying to promote remote participation as something that the state will allow. Right now, the state will not allow that. At
For
least not,
open, right?
Sorry, for open town meeting.
Yeah.
at least not in a formal sense. We're going to talk a little bit about the interim report that the Mass Moderators Association put together about town meeting in the future, which talks a lot about remote town meeting, a lot about the technology issues, the legal issues, the workarounds that a number of communities are experimenting with to dip their toe into remote participation. And as we talked last time about the technology issues, we found ourselves wandering into the policy questions. How do you make this work? And there's John's suggestion that we go next to the Mass Moderators Association report and kind of use that as a basis for a conversation about policy issues. And both Michael and John have enumerated their view of how these issues sort out, and I failed to write that down. But I'm happy to have either of you take the lead on working through the policy questions here. The sort of fundamental question that you raised as Beth was walking in. I think it was, let me paraphrase, what is town meeting for? What is the function that's being performed here? And values of democracy, values of deliberation, the different ways in which you mentioned this, the different ways in which different towns can perform that function. From the open town meeting, the representative town meeting, to the Australian ballot, to the government by referendum, to the town council, city council form of government. And it probably would be useful if we can, at some point in this process today, put a stake in the ground about where each of us might be on some of these fundamental issues.
Do you think that's premature?
I think that there are people who are, I think that ultimately it's premature, but I think we all have preliminary opinions.
Right. Okay. One further thing. Do you want to, my understanding is one of the expectations of this committee is to bring something to annual town meeting next year to say, would the town like to support a letter to the legislature and the governor to allow to allow remote voting at town meetings. Is that not one of the things you're hoping to do?
Michael, my understanding from last week is the selectmen already signed a letter to the legislature, asking them to pass a law allowing remote town meeting.
But where does the selectman get the authority to do that?
Well, it's not the same. You can say, I support that idea conceptually, globally for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. That doesn't mean necessarily you're saying town of Weston should do it.
Right. But I thought one of our hopes was to sort of get the town's formal view, so that any application to the legislature would indicate that the town is behind it. Because for the town to adopt it would require I think, a ballot vote, right? Or
You have to change the bylaws. Yes, it would require something at town meeting. I'd have to read what the bylaws say. But because you're changing a bylaw, I understand, Michael, with what you're saying, and I agree. But the selectmen already signed a letter with, I think, 5 towns, and saying that we would like them to consider allowing this. This did not go to the ballot this year, so it's going to be on for next year.
but that's the point. Aren't we going to sort of spearhead that being on a ballot next year?
One of our two reporting dates are the end of the calendar year when this committee reports back to the moderator, and then at the next town meeting when we report back to the town.
Right. I just wanted to make that clear to the our audience for today, because I think you want to start as well. What's their goal? I mean, why is this committee here? And I think those are two things that are really important to start out with. That's the lead. We have a report due by year end, and we have a presentation to town meeting presumably next May.
Well, it's advisory, right? I mean, we're not making any decisions on behalf of the town. We're just advising.
Right.
Yeah, but I would expect, much in the way that Concord's town meeting study committee worked, that we would end up with a position and a recommendation for the town meeting to act on.
Right.
We'd be making a recommendation to the select board to put that question on the warrant for the town meeting.
Well, how can you put something on the warrant when it's not allowed by the state? So wouldn't the question on the warrant be, should the town request the state? I mean,
Sure. So the way that this has been done in Wayland and in Concord is each one of them has submitted at the request. The select board has submitted a home rule petition that would authorize the town to conduct an open town meeting using remote technology, essentially. In addition to the 2 home rule petitions that have been filed by Concord and Wayland, there's I think a half a dozen pieces of general legislation that were filed in the last 2 years that would provide, in a more general sense, authority for towns to opt into offering remote participation to people who are to utilize that. And it had established a process for the town to opt in. And those pieces of legislation were based on home rule petition by the town of Plymouth, which is a representative town meeting community, to do exactly that, to have permanent permission to conduct a town meeting either in a remote, hybrid, or in fully present format. And there's a process that they go through at the beginning of every town meeting to set that up. I envision that we would end up with a view on what Weston ought to do here. And it may be that we would want to file a town home rule petition like Concord and Wayland did. It might be that we would want to opt into one of these more general pieces of legislation that would give us an opportunity to participate, for example, in pilot program. And that those are all things for us to talk about and think about what we think might be best. but we come back to, I think, at the beginning of this discussion, what's town meeting all about? And what are we trying to accomplish? I think we can go off on that and talk a little bit about the series of policy questions that you, John, and Mike.
Yeah, we, in fact, since Beth and walked in a little bit late, I can't remember exactly what they're having a conversation. Why for Chris summarize what Michael and I think are the sort of 5 or 6 levels of the discussion, the last one of which we just discussed has to do with legal implementation. But I mean, I think that it starts with this sort of a question of political philosophy, which gets to sort of true democracy versus representative or Republican government. And to the extent that decisions are made, I'm not going to say non-democratically, but in a more representative way, where the representatives are either, who chooses the representatives? Are they chosen as in the form of a representative town meeting, or is it representative as it is now by 400 or 500 people who happen to self-select to be representatives of the 8,000 voters in town? There's a political philosophy having to do with deliberation, the importance of deliberation, and how that fits into the entire process. There's kind of a practical aspect of this political philosophy thing, which is the vast majority, and I mean vast, like 80 or 85% of people, not just in Weston, but in any other town that has surveyed this topic, thinks that we ought to have remote participation. They're really, really dissatisfied with having to show up at the high school at 7 o'clock on Monday night and make a bunch of decisions, most of which are not really of high interest to them, but they may be there for 1 or 2 school field lighting vote or whatever, and then they have to sit through 15.
I'm gonna stop you there.
Okay.
Where are you getting that vast majority of people other than from,
We had a
last
survey.
meeting?
We had a survey that Town Monitor and Concord had a survey and Wayland had a survey.
So
Any
I'm gonna throw out the Weston survey. I mean, I just think that Weston survey was done at a time when a lot of people really weren't participating. So I think you're relying on Concord and Wayland. I don't feel that we have a good sense in Weston.
well, we can get so I'm trying to lay out the issues, and maybe one of the issues is where and how do we get some concrete, actionable survey data that we can base a recommendation on. And if the survey that Rip put together is not what you consider usable for whatever reason, and I don't think you're the only one who thinks that. I know some other people who weren't super happy with that survey.
I apologize.
No, that's fine.
But I mean that's sort of an issue that flows from that. So there's a political philosophy question. Then there are what I would call, I think Michael and I are talking about the same things, but I would distinguish those political philosophy questions from policy questions that are, we'll get to them when we start talking about this MMA report, but they're like, does somebody have to register every single time there's a town meeting? Can they vote, or can they just participate by listening? Can the moderator cherry pick the order of people based on his understanding of what they want to say? It's just like they're sort of technical logistical issues, but the way you answer them reflects your thoughts about how you really want all this to play out and mean. So there's and a lot of them are enumerated in stuff.
Yeah, and just to back up just a little bit, and if I'm talking over anybody, let me know. With the vast majority of people who've expressed a view on this are the vast majority of a very small subset, self-selected people who've responded to surveys, who've done this sort of thing. And I'd just be careful about vast majority characterizations. It would be great for us to do a survey.
I probably wouldn't have said that, except that the numbers are very similar to Concord and Wayland, where they had large representative surveys.
Concord had 1,000 out of 15,000. That's still not huge.
In market research statistical terms, that's huge.
It's huge
Except-
if it's a proper
If it-
sample.
It's not a properly sampled survey.
And that's the fundamental criticism of what I've done, what Weston did in the past 10 years ago, what Nuance done, Concord's done.
So
I'm
political
not sure that for decision purposes, I'm not actually sure that it matters if it was a properly sampled survey. But go ahead.
So
political philosophy, policy. Third level is what I would call technical, which is the topic that we discussed with Dave Bernstein last week. It's just, can you make this technically work? Is it secure? Is there privacy?
Can I
Can be
say-
hacked and stuff?
It's just a question. The person who's a computer expert, Ron?
Yeah.
Is he here?
he's not here today.
Okay, I was just I'm
Right. No, I'm not saying one way, I'm not saying one way or another. I'm saying
no,
it's a
no,
topic area.
but he's still on the committee.
He's on the-
Okay, I was just
Yeah.
wondering.
Then there are legal issues which have to do with what's legal now and what would legally need to happen for us to be able to decide to have remote participation or not. And then finally, I think of the fifth category as what I would call implementation execution, which is how actually would we, if we thought this was a good idea, how would we go about getting the legislature to act, get permission, would we test it, how would we evaluate a test, how would we explain it to people, and so on and so forth. How would we evolve it if we started doing it a year or two later, we didn't like it, there were kind of implementation issues. And then I wrote on my notes, there's a sixth category of thinking through what are the possible unintended consequences and how do you mitigate the risks of all of this. And we talked last week about primarily the technical issues. That was what Dave was getting into. And I may be putting words in your mouth, Rick, but I think you said at the end of that meeting, you concluded that this is technically possible. There are some risks, but they can be managed. So let's now, in the next meeting, talk about some of these higher level philosophical policy questions.
Sure, I think that, yeah, it's a good summary. It's technical, the technological barriers are not insurmountable. Pretty comfortable that it can be done. And then you sort of get into the questions, well, is it something that we should do? And to your point that most of the polling we've seen in the survey suggests that there are people who would really like this to be explored and they would like to get a shot. So Michael, does that kind of exhaust your list of?
Yeah, very similar. I would have, described it slightly differently, and I don't see as much a distinction between deliberative process and democratic process, because I think allowing for the broadest level of participation and technologically permitting anyone who is participating to actually participate in the deliberations is, to me, melds the two of those issues together. So I think it's more that do we feel having people truly face to face, carrying on a tradition is important, or do we think that deliberation can occur given the technology that seems to be able to allow it, and enable the potential for more people to participate in this, democratically participate? So,
I thought that on page 26 of the moderator's report. I think the big question in my mind, we have to say, would remote participation erode the sense of community by open town meeting? And I started from John and Michael from that point, the sense of community. And I do believe that there's a strong sense of community at open town meeting. And I
But-
do, go on.
But we have 400 people out of 7,000 voters there. How, I mean, is that community? I mean, and
You know, it's,
Yeah, please.
You're reflecting your generational bias with that. There are plenty of online communities with younger people. They have never met ever in person. They feel an extremely strong sense of community. It could be, my sister is involved in one, for example, strictly online. She has never met these people. She talks about them like they're her friends. So it's maybe not for us, but for 30 and 40-year-olds, they may well feel a very strong sense of community. And especially this is still a community where, you know, if you're online, you can see people. There's still parents in the school. They know these people. It's just younger people can feel more bound by technology than older people in some cases. So I just, we don't have a really younger person here, but it is possible. I don't think there were kinds of community or just doing that. I was in a writers group, for example. It started online on Zoom before COVID. I have not met most of these people in person ever. I know all kinds of things about them. I feel very strong ties to them. I've never met them. They don't even live in Massachusetts.
see, how I see it though, Ann, is that's a very small group. And this is a town, and this is a bedroom community. A lot of people don't know their neighbors, they don't go out, and there's a sense of isolation. So if you do remote participation, I just believe that deliberation and open town meeting with people present is important.
I think younger people would disagree with you.
It's also, I guess what I would say is that if you go back to the fundamental purpose of town meeting, it's not to create a sense of community. The purpose of town meeting is to make decisions, having to do with what happens at our level of government. There are things that happen at the national level of government, things that happen at the state level of government, there are things that happen at the local level of government. And then there are decisions that you make about how you live your life in your household and in your head, right? In your own head, right?
That's a terrible place to be.
And the point that I'm going to make about the local thing is that the purpose of town meeting is not to create a sense of community. That may be an important subsidiary result of it, but that's not why we do it. Why we do it is because we have established a democratic Republican society. We're not a dictatorship. We're not allowing Rick to decide, what our taxes are going to be or whatever, or John McDonald, who's the chair of the select board, or Leon. It's just like we have a representative. We have a body that is empowered to make decisions based on certain staff work that comes ahead of that by, elected or hired representatives, boards, whoever, interested citizens. We have deliberation that happens, and then we have a vote, and then we move on. And the trade-off I think that you're identifying is that if you meet in person, that there's a greater sense of community. So the subsidiary purpose of town meeting is served by having direct, concurrent, synchronous, at the same place meeting deliberation. Whereas one might argue that that precludes a lot of people from participating in a decision that they really might feel strongly about, but they just can't for whatever reason. They're disabled, they have kids, can't get a babysitter, they're out of town, or they just are frustrated by having to sit through a 3-hour meeting to make one important decision. And so it's sort of, that's community. It's like, I agree that that's an important benefit, but that's not why we're doing it.
Well, I just want to say that we're doing it because it's the community as a whole that has the authority to make these decisions. And when we come together in a town meeting, we have a bunch of proposals. And I'll say that as a town, the voters of Weston are pretty relaxed and submissive about this. I can't remember last time anybody moved to amend anything that was on the floor of the town meeting. I can't remember anybody. All of the people who complain about the budget, no one in my memory has moved to amend the budget by reducing it or increasing it in some way. I just want to say that the power to make these decisions and to shape these decisions belongs to the town meeting, not to the select board, not to the planning board. They make proposals, and those proposals are completely amendable within the scope of the warrant itself. And it is seldom, if ever, that the town meeting exercises its authority, exercises the full scope of its power.
But you can come in the process, which is why I sort of think the deliberative aspect often starts before town meeting, and that there's times where, you can go to the rec commission meeting, you can go to the school board meetings. That never happened. They do. You can come to any meeting and give input then, and the committee is responsive. They're going to listen, and so you may have deliberation that occurs before town meeting in the form of, we've heard people's opinions who cared enough to show up. It's interesting, not very many people. And we listen, and those are incorporated into the ultimate proposal that comes to town meeting. So, you have an ability to affect the proposal, the budget, before you get to town meeting.
But there are so many motions to amend, and there are motions to amend all the time at town meeting. They're shot down a lot of times, but you hear the proponents and the opponents talking about the motions. This is, yes, majority of the votes are any discussion, no. But there are those matters where you have motions and you have people objecting, and you have items that fail and they come back again and again. It doesn't matter because it was poorly presented the first time. The fact was that people stood up and said, no, you shouldn't go ahead with that. Yeah, so I think that's part of the deliberation, and that deliberation takes place at town meeting.
And some of it happens, as you were saying,
But
as
some
Ann
of
was
it
saying
happens
beforehand.
before.
And in many cases, the warrant book is printed. It's printed with a particular proposal, and the planning board comes with an
Another
amendment,
proposal.
a different proposal. We have the town tree bylaw for a while. That was a very interesting discussion, but there was something in the warrant book about that. And it was in a constant state of flux until we actually got to the meeting where it was hotly debated and defeated. Yeah, very much. So I guess what I was trying to highlight is that the body as a deliberative body doesn't exercise its deliberative function as thoroughly and about as many things as it could.
I know it's a very
Absolutely.
robust
Absolutely.
deliberation.
And so I think it's important for us to kind of identify, is that an important value? I just want to just refer you back to that section. We want to use this MMA report.
Yeah. But
What are the essential qualities of town meeting?
it's
Which
23.
page?
Page starts at page 23 under section 5, policy considerations. And I think that I appreciate what you're saying, John, about the value of participation democratic participation. And to be fair about it, I think that everybody should be able to participate. I even think that everybody should participate. But we don't make people come to town meeting. We don't make people vote for the select board. We don't make people do anything. It's a self-selecting group and always will be a self-selecting group of people who will make these decisions. And we should, I think to your fundamental point, John, is we shouldn't.
Hello, my friends. How are you?
Yeah, we do it.
How are you guys?
Yeah.
Nice to see you. Have a good night.
You too.
Let me read to you my note right next to that top paragraph on page 23, which it says the essential quantities town meeting. It's basically my note to myself, but I'll state it to you is this is simply a stated premise. These are debatable in terms of governing philosophy. So you've stated that, it's asserted here, but my point of view is that's not necessarily true. And the point is that you can agree with each of these sub bullets. I actually agree with all of them except for the second one. That the second one I said yes, but it doesn't mean that it has to be at the same time and place.
Yeah. It's
And
not at the same time, but it's not at the same time and place.
by that, I mean, if you go back to page 18
Okay.
of this report, there's a little matrix, and it's basically, they call it a
Oh,
time,
I see.
space, groupware matrix, and it's basically, you can have things at the same time or different times, or you can have things at the same place or different places. And if you're talking about the same time in the same place, you're basically talking about the time meeting. It happens at 7 o'clock on Monday night, and it all happens right there face to face. Whereas if you allow same time but in different places, you're allowing remote interactions. And remote is really not yes or no. We already have remote participation because we have some people in the high school auditorium and some people in the gym, and they're already remote. North Andover allows another level of remote participation, which is they allow people with disabilities under the ADA to participate remotely the way we might envision. But they basically circumvented the legislature by saying we're applying national ADA law rather than state law that prohibits this. But if you start talking about different times and potentially different times in different places, the decision-making process could happen over remote communication, like a Facebook kind of environment, over a 2-week period where the deliberation, the amendments, the ability to speak or not speak, the pros and the cons can happen. Everybody's sitting in their living room over a 2-week period, and then a decision.
Yeah.
So,
Oh my God.
well, but the point is that I think
No, I
that
know.
you have to open your mind up a little bit to think about what are we really trying to accomplish in a town meeting? We're trying to accomplish a great decision.
Yep.
And what are the components? What's the recipe for that decision? And part of my argument has been to you that the part of the recipe that has to do with the staff work that even leads into the deliberation, not to mention the decision, that the staff work is a gigantic opportunity for improvement. There is the way the warrant gets put together, where you just cited it yourself. We end up with a bunch of warrants that are just generic BS. You don't even have amounts of money in there or anything. They're just placeholders so that this topic is on the agenda. Gigantic opportunity for improvement. If the staff work was done not only well, but on a more timely basis, we could have a more accurate warrant article. And then you get to the deliberation where there's an opportunity. There are lots of opportunity for improvements, whether we do it remotely or not. And then the decision gets made. And if we have those opportunities, those improvements in the staff work, the warrant article, the deliberation, and maybe even the decision making itself, we'll end up with better decisions. That's I think what we're trying to get at, right?
Yeah, then what you've recited there, I think comports with the conclusions of the Concord Town Meeting Study Committee, which was that there's a lot of work that needs to be done ahead of time. And I think that actually our staff work and the detail in our warrant is better than you just described. I mean, we do have a budget that's in the warrant book. We do have very elaborate planning, zoning proposals. The part of the issue is that these things are in a state of flux. And we don't really nail them down until the day before the meeting. Opportunity for improvement. And a lot of what Concord focused on was that opportunity. And it was preparing the decision and preparing the voters for the decision that they were making in the run up to the meeting over the course of many months, and providing people at the moment of truth with the best and most complete information that they could have, so that they can have a full and a fair and an efficient conversation about anything that they really want to discuss. And if they don't want to discuss anything, they can have an efficient vote on that and move on.
I think there's another dimension to this too. And it fits into one, the opportunity for improvement about what's on the warrant and what's actually deliberated at town meeting, which is so much of what happens in government at any level has to do with delegation, that we decide to delegate our fundamental decision-making rights to somebody else. We delegate them to Congress. We delegate them to Leon. We delegate them to the select board or whatever. And part of the opportunity for improvement is that we've already made a big improvement in the last few years by putting in effect a consent agenda that we are in effect, I'm delegating my decision making, my vote on Article 8 to a different process, same people but different process, whereby I don't really get to debate that. It's just going to be a consent agenda. I think that's okay. I delegate to that. Whereas something else, an important vote on school building or something like that, I'm not going to delegate that. Definitely not delegating it to school committee, to Leon, to the select board, or even to the consent agenda. I want to vote on that. And, there are some people, different people have different thresholds of delegation. There are some people in town, lots of people apparently, who think it's perfectly reasonable to delegate everything to whoever shows up at town meeting. I just don't care. Send me my tax bill. I'm only here for a few years until my kids graduate from high school. Whatever you guys decide about the school buildings is good with me.
And they're not gonna change.
And they're not going to change. They're not
gonna do remote participation.
even if we
they're
do
not
remote
gonna do
participation,
anything.
they're never going to show up. And still, it could even be a majority. Even if we made it easier for people to participate remotely, we still might get only 10% participation, not 3%.
I'm gonna say it's clearly a majority of the voters that don't participate.
Yeah,
They don't participate in elections.
even
Why would you think that they would show up and sit?
exactly.
And so there are, I would say, one way to put it is that a majority of the voters in Weston are happy in every town, I guess, to delegate these decisions to the people who show up, whoever shows up.
Whoever, they don't even care who they're delegating it to. Some of them might be to the select board, some might be to the town manager, some might be to the people that show up.
So could I jump in here? We have never discussed, or to my knowledge, we haven't discussed representative town meeting, and the state law only requires a population of 6,000, and typically representative town meetings have a minimum of 45 and a maximum of several hundred. But and if we're talking about delegation, maybe we should delegate further back for this process. Why shouldn't this be at least a part of our discussion and report?
Changing from open town meeting to having elected, voted upon representatives like Wellesley, like Reading, like Plymouth? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Is it an alternative that we should consider? In the unscientific sampling, in the surveys that we've done, Weston isn't really interested in that, as far as I can tell. Concord wasn't interested in that.
So that would be probably the people filled out the survey and the people who go to town.
That's usually, that's the case. Although those people, back to John's initial point, the majority of those people are interested in remote participation. even though, as you point out, there are people that go to town meeting already.
But it's just easier. You're telling me I could stay home and do something and still do remote participation?
Yeah.
That's more appealing to me than going and struggling to find a parking spot at the high school. But it's not, you're not changing the number of people who attend or participate at town meeting. I just think it's an easier way to do it. It's a
But you just hit one of my problems on the head, Ann. You could be at home doing other things, and then when the subject comes up, you're gonna vote on it. Yeah,
but
I wanna make you sit through everything and participate.
Well, that's,
Well, it's
but
not
that's
that-
actually a
that-
key question though, because should we be making people jump through hoops in order to exercise their fundamental rights?
Well, it was interesting because when you read through this, you can, one of the, I forget which town, does have a remote town meeting. They have it you could have it over at the school. And it's open for any of the people over at Brook School or anyone who doesn't want to fight the parking lot at high school. They can go and do a remote participation, just like you do remote participation in
The gym.
in the gymnasium.
So just, I don't want to lose track of this, but one of the things that we had decided to do earlier on, and we haven't really done it yet, is to, or at least I try to oppose this obligation to everybody, is to, what are the other issues besides remote participation at large that we need to think about? And there's a perfect example. Should we make a conscientious effort to hold town meeting in 3 or 4 different locations simultaneously that are convenient? For example, there could be a room at the Brook School Apartments.
upstairs.
There could be a room here at Town Hall. There's a community room over at Highland Meadow. Could that be a remote location? There's
And is that's permissible now, Andrew? Wouldn't that be permissible now if you could say these are the, identify the locations?
yes,
Yeah, so
and I think that if you push really hard on it, you can find there's a lot of softness in what's not, in the barriers to this kind of thing. For example, although Dave Bernstein, when he was here talking with us the other day, said that there's a requirement that people who are participating in different locations be connected by a loudspeaker system that allows everybody to know what's going on. He said there must also be an assistant moderator in each of these spaces. There is no requirement. There must be an assistant moderator in each of these spaces. I think it's made clear in this report and elsewhere. And as you sort of, get more granular about this, your living room could be a remote location from which it's permissible to participate.
Well, see, that's the slippery.
And my here's good. So it feels like there's a way, if we want it, there's a way to experiment with this. Just this committee says that, the moderator ought to, and the select board ought to experiment with this and be more aggressive in soliciting requests for accommodations. Maybe not just ADA accommodations, which the Attorney General's office has explicitly blessed and said you can do that by Zoom. And you don't have to have a separate moderator at that hospital bed in somebody's living room. And being more generous about that.
Well, that's also potentially an implementation issue, which is that maybe the question for the town meeting is not, should we have remote participation or not? But here's an idea. What do you think of this? We'll have, now we've got, I would argue that the gym is a remote location. I would start with that premise. And then I would say, I'm going to add 3 more remote locations: Town Hall, Brook School Apartments, and
My living room.
and the COA. And actually, we're going to add a 4th by application if you have a disability of some sort that prevents you from getting to any one of these things. We can make you a living room a remote location. We wouldn't expect those to be more than a handful of people who would ask for that, but we can enable that and see how that goes. Then after 2 years, add another 10 locations and lower the threshold for living room applications to anybody who's over age 65 And anybody who has small children at home, you know, who would need a babysitter and so on. And you could like salami slice your way into this over a period of 5 to 10 years, rather than having to make a decision now that some people like you or a couple of.
Michael, you're shaking your head.
I just, we're taking multiple steps to get to what we think might be a position that the majority of Weston residents and voters would like, which is remote participation. To say, oh, well, let's have 3 other locations and we'll see if we can noodle around the regulations. It seems to me it's a lot of work. And is it really worth it? I mean, let's find out if people would like this idea, and if so, let's move with as much political force as we can muster to get it to happen. And I think the trend statewide or Commonwealth wide is pretty consistently supporting this. You know, there have been many changes to town meeting voting in the past. We've started out with you had to be a property owner, you had to be male, you had to be white. We now have you had to be over 21. We've eliminated all those. Maybe they're social ones, but we've also added clickers, which is the beginning of technological input to make it a more efficient meeting. And to me, this is just moving along a path that's been well established since the 1780s when we eliminated somewhere in there, we eliminated home ownership or property ownership. So let's move it.
Should it, Michael, to you, if such a survey would say, are you for remote participation? I think for that survey to be accurate, you'd have to say it would cost the town X amount of money to do this.
Oh,
And
I don't think the technology is quite there yet, but what we heard last meeting was we're getting there, and we're getting there at something that would be relatively cheap. And so maybe we're going to say, hey, we won't move into this if it's going to be too expensive, but the technology is moving, and the technology will move when enough towns in Massachusetts say they want it, and then companies will say, okay, well, we can put together a clicker that will work remotely, or we can put together a program that will work on your phone or your laptop.
Yeah, the cost will decrease to zero. Just
Yeah,
like,
the cost is going to come down. It's just clear.
I don't know if you were here last week, but
Yeah.
or last meeting, but you know, I mentioned when I was in the corporate world, you know, 20 years ago, to do what today we would call a Zoom call, Cisco had a system, and it was $100,000 per node, plus you know rental thing, you know, and it's like now it's literally free. It's on your computer. In fact, it's on your phone. You can do Zoom on your phone, so it's only a matter of time before it's free. And not only for towns, not only for parts of the country that have a town meeting now and will eventually go remote, but I predict, you heard it here first, once we demonstrate, we in New England demonstrate that you can have democratic government by cell phone, over your cell phone, right? People in Texas and Utah and Idaho will implement it.
In fact,
Notwithstanding whatever administration is in
yeah.
Washington. Then I'll do my voting.
Thank
You heard it here first. Like Al Gore invented the internet.
If only Ron were here, he would tell us what a bad idea that might be, but
That's a,
Yeah.
that is that is the security question. And actually,
there are security
and
questions.
there's a question about whether the rest of the country really does work.
Yeah, no,
These town meetings been around for a long time. It was here at the beginning of the United States and didn't get adopted by anybody outside of New England.
Yeah.
It wasn't that complicated.
you could have some debate about why that might have been the case as the country was expanding, but separate topic.
So,
So
go ahead.
Can I go back to the issue of representative town meeting? Because aren't we now, I think, John, you pointed this out, we're sort of opting for 400 people to represent, who are self-selected to represent the 7,000 voters. We've also noted that more people show up at elections than show up at town meetings. Why are we sort of not addressing specifically the possibility of representative town meeting instead of open town meeting?
I think that's worth a discussion.
I mean, I think it has to be a part of our
I think it's
discussion and analysis.
I agree. My take on it, if I recall reading your survey, and also what they came up with in Concord when they raised it, was when they do surveys, people say they don't want it by large majorities. And my interpretation of that is a lot of people who responded to surveys are people who would go to town meeting and they don't like being cut out of the process.
And I think when you have an issue that you really want to go to,
I want to go. I don't
wanna
want to
go
rely on Beth
because-
Nolan.
because Beth Nolan's going to vote how she wants to vote.
Right,
and you
Right,
wanna
and
vote
I
for
want
her.
that vote
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
Yeah.
like,
So let's just on the representative versus open town meeting question. In my mind, I see in either scenario, either system, it is a self-selected group of people who will end up making the decisions. In open town meeting, it's anybody who wants to and can show up will vote. In a representative town meeting, it's anybody who wants to be a town meeting member
wants to run for office.
and runs for office. And in a small town, let's say we were gonna have 150 town meeting members, dividing the town up in some way to do that. I'm just gonna guess that the anemic number of votes that an individual would have, individual town meeting member might have in order to be a representative. So I'm just gonna say, maybe it's still in either scenario, it's just a question of who raises their hand, who selects to participate.
Right.
And the people with an issue, because they can't drive at night or they have kids at home, they're not gonna run for town meeting member because they can't go to the town meeting. I mean, maybe if it's a representative town meeting and there's remote participation as an option, then that would be an easier decision for them to make.
I thought what you were going to say, which is if we had 150 members or 100 members of the representative town meeting, that we would have a hard time getting 25 people to volunteer to run for representative town meeting. So then you're left with 75 open seats.
Oh, that would be a possibility.
I think that's a huge possibility.
That's a huge possibility, but it's also
I-
a possibility.
I absolutely agree with that. I think really the best counter argument to representative town meeting is remote voting.
Yeah, I would have concern. I mean, just for remote town meeting, not only would we get enough or not get enough, I would just, especially given just sort of like the way the overall political climate in this country is evolving, I would have concerns about people who really wanted to be the representative town meeting, the representatives. I
agree.
I'm not super confident in institutional level government now, the motives of people for being there, the reasons they vote the way they do. And I would be reluctant to give up my own vote on the issues that do come before town meeting, just at this point in time.
Yep.
Because of I would question the motives of the people. I would not trust the motives of the people necessarily.
So, and I agree with you. And what's interesting is typically there's 3-year revolving votes for representative town meeting, and the issues in the upcoming meeting where someone might be running to be a representative may be very different from the ones 3 years hence when they're last voting. And I think open town meeting is preferred because the issues change and the importance of issues, and we tend to see people running on single issues these days. So how will they vote on the other ones that are going to come up? I think it's problematic, but I think we ought to mention why we believe that that's not a good approach for the town.
I just feel at this point in time, I'm not interested in concentrating power at the grassroots level.
So can we get a consensus of this committee that we discussed open representative town meeting and we tabled it?
I don't think we're ready to table it yet because I think it's part of the overall. Don't we want to have somewhat more information before we?
Town meeting?
Can we sort
I
of
don't
organize ourselves a little bit this way? Can we give people assignments, people accept an assignment to look into that issue, for example, more deeply and come back to the committee with a recommendation and a justification for that recommendation? Or is it premature to?
I would say premature myself. That's what I would say. I would say yes, but premature.
Yeah, so one of the things that we're gonna have to think about is how do we take some of these questions and issues from the premature to the, let's figure out how to dig in, take some action, and take a position.
Because we could talk.
And incorporate it in the report. I mean,
And I'll point out Chris's benefit as well as for everybody here again, that we're not going down this road for the first time. Everybody that studied this issue they've done this and they've looked at all of this. And it could be as simple as each one of us or a subgroup of us going through all of that other analysis that other people have done and take it into consideration and think about whether or not there is some question that we should put to the voters of Weston because we're unique and different than these other communities, and get a view of what the voters think of Weston. But that might be one way to dispose of some of these questions.
Can I ask you your sense of one of those potential differences? But because my hypothesis going in is we're really not that different from, say, Concord Way, Seattle, Boston, suburban towns. But I'm wondering, do you have a sense? One of the things that we all acknowledge is kind of an issue is that we have a hard time getting people to volunteer for stuff. We have more difficulty than some of these other towns, to your knowledge. Because people are apt to have weekend homes, or they have enough money that they just don't care what their tax rate is or whatever.
I don't think I have enough data to be able to say that we're different in that respect. I think there's a very high level of volunteerism in Lincoln and Concord, less so maybe in a lot of developments. They've got to represent. Yeah. But we have a lot of committees in Weston, and some of which may not be necessary.
I guess the reason I asked that is that we were talking about representative town meeting, and a few of us hypothesized that you couldn't make it work in Weston because you couldn't get enough volunteers, and maybe the answer is some of these other questions relates to a few of those things that are in some way different about Weston than other towns. I don't know if they are, but that's one that might be different.
I mean, sure.
Another one might be the affluence that, for example, if it costs $30,000 to implement this per town meeting, maybe we, unlike another town, might say, who cares? You know, if it's going to make better decisions, it's worth the 30 grand, even though somebody in Waltham might say, are you kidding me? We're not spending 30 grand on that. You show up, you get to, get yourself to the high school if you want to vote.
I'm wondering if on page 23 of those questions and concerns, maybe if we go through those and discuss the what's allowed and what's not allowed.
Yeah, let me just point out that this report was written in 2019.
Yeah.
The world has changed since then, dramatic.
But a lot of it's philosophical.
a lot of it is philosophical. A lot of the sort of the technological limitations that kind of inform some of these questions are no longer limitations.
But yes, you think so.
Yeah, well, that's true.
But I'm sitting in the audience and I'm lined up and like I go to a store and I'm in line and the phone rings and they answer the phone and they answer that first. So just the process of implementation, if you're doing remote participation, people could do the questions ahead of time and submit them, or people can stand in line and submit them. How do you do that order? Just the order of participation, I think, is something that people want to be very explicit about. Just like they want to be very explicit about, you want to register one time for all. They say you go in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 days before, then have your picture taken. These are things that if you're going to say, well, when we discuss remote participation, I think just remote participation, people will say, yeah, that's great. But it's the devil in the details, John.
I agree. I totally, that's a no argument, no argument at all.
So I don't know how.
There, in fact, that's what I call the category of policy decisions. There are 50 or 100 of those that have more to do with, I would call it executional philosophy as opposed to overall political philosophy, but you have to decide.
But the execution philosophy
Yeah.
is important.
Absolutely,
Right.
totally agree, totally
But-
agree.
It's really like tactics when you're talking about, like, say, the order. And from what I heard the other day, at the presentation, the determining the order is actually, that seems fairly straightforward. They all come in line, isn't it? Just works the same way it does now. You just are adding remote people into a queue, and you queue it up, whoever is there, first or second. It's just, but the issue that I see is, if the question for me was, people in Weston seem to be frustrated by the perceived difficulties of exercising their right to vote at town meeting. And that remote participation is a way to potentially expand participation. It might just redistribute participation, but it could potentially expand it to more people. If you expand participation at town meeting, it becomes longer. If all of a sudden 50 people are at home and they want to speak, that's 50 more people that you have to listen to. And so, no, but it's not a question of the order. That seems easy to put them in order. Whoever comes in and they speak, you're visible, okay, but it's just more.
You're always going to have the problem of how much discussion, how much process is enough.
How much process is enough? And one of my things with the deliberative aspect of town meeting, where we're talking about the issues, is that the issues are often have highly technical components, studies, engineering studies, financial analysis is probably fairly straightforward, I think. But like understanding the technical components, the scientific components, the major pieces of a big engineering work, or the fundamental issues that drive why we need a new fire station, all the underlying things about education that drive what a school, they're complicated. And so to think that you're going to go to town meeting and participate remotely or in present and be able to, and knowing nothing and getting a full grasp of all the nuances of the debate, that's ridiculous. You can't show up at town meeting and say, like, I know nothing about the water tank project, but I'm going to come away. I'm going to understand all the things. And that's why you have people who stand up at town meeting and say, like, have you considered X? Yeah, no. I'm just like, 3 years we've been looking at this and no one thought of that, but that happens. And so the deliberative aspect to get a thorough deliberation on the issue, that I just think is unrealistic. And town meeting, so it has to take place before, which is, then you get to the queue of getting, people to say. But people, what they think is like, I want to stand up and say my piece, and your piece has been said 3 months ago, and
So what you're saying is the one benefit, well, not the one benefit, one of the benefits of a physical 3-hour town meeting at the high school is the deliberation is limited to 3 hours, or however late people can stay awake.
it can be also remote. You might be selecting the people in person at town hall. The deliberation, people don't have an appetite for 4 days of deliberation on a topic, right? So
Out in West,
whether or not the participation is remote or in person at the high school, you have 3 hours to get out all the deliberation points of all those warrant articles, right?
But let me offer a different vision, which is, let's say that there's, again, we're talking about making great decisions, which means making sure that we have great staff work, great concepts, great staff work,
Yep.
and great deliberation, very full deliberation. But what if instead of the 3-hour meeting deliberation, you had a 2-week period
Yeah.
where deliberation happens kind of on a rolling basis, and that way, the reason I say that that's better deliberation and remote, the reason I say it's better deliberation is people have more time to think about, so-and-so made that, or the engineer did this analysis. I now have 2 days when I can redo that analysis myself using his data and figure out if he did a good job.
Yeah,
or not.
no, we're on the same page here.
Yeah.
I think the deliberation process has got to be way more than 3 hours. at
Or,
town meeting.
or select person A said, this is more sustainable. And it's like, well, on the surface, it's more sustainable, but if you actually dig into it, no, it's actually not more sustainable.
But John, don't we do that anyway? We have budget hearings, we have hearings
Well,
for everything ahead of time. And people can do that by Zoom. So I
here's I think the answer is not really a practical sense. And the reason I say that is that those quote what you call deliberations, listening sessions, traffic and sidewalk committee meetings that happen over a 9-month period or whatever, combine the mundane and the ridiculous along with the sublime. And so people completely tune it out. And it's really not a good use of time. Whereas if you compressed all that into a relatively short period of time, it could be a week, it could be 2 weeks or whatever, as opposed to trying to jam into, 10 minutes of a 3-hour town meeting, that they're whether it's a week or 2 weeks, I'm not really sure, but there's some compressed amount of time. It's almost like the Australian system, only instead of having a deliberation meeting and then a decision meeting, it's both of them end up being remote enabled. They don't have to be, one is completely remote, one is remote enabled. You don't have to be remote if you don't want to, you can still show up at the high school. But the time period for the deliberation event is not the 3 hours of the town meeting. It's a week or two or whatever the right time period is, when people can, it's like you open the gate, somebody makes the presentation, and then it's like, a moderated, you need a moderator who's willing to go in every day and kick off people who are making snide remarks and correct somebody's amendment, so they can actually be voted on. The voting on amendments might happen during that deliberation period. I'm kind of like free associating it here, but just like Michael said, should we consider a representative town meeting? We need to come to a point of view on that and articulate the reasons why or why not. I view this Australian thing and some evolution of that towards an online Australian thing as something else that we might want to talk about. Whether it's a good idea or not, I'm not going to say, but I have a sense that something like that might be worth considering.
there's a little,
So I think anyone who has been on a committee or served on the select board will note how many times they heard people say, after months of committee action and discussions and public hearings, how come this is the first time I've heard about it at a town meeting? And if we
Well-
somehow are able to get people to buy into a system that says, the deliberation is going to be largely in the week before town meeting. Here are the articles. Here's the warrant. Here's the articles. Here's the explanation, and here's the mechanism to ask your questions. Might be a good idea.
well, that's where Concord ended up. Deciding that voter preparation was really important. And they have a series of meetings, once the warrant's been constructed. They have a series of meetings for 2 to 3 weeks ahead of town meeting, when they have a moderated discussion of the financial articles, the planning articles, and the other articles. And people have the opportunity to ask questions. The boards that are proposing those particular articles and the motions to those articles have an opportunity to get some feedback, some questions, and to consider what the final motion ought to look like. Some cases, those discussions lead to changes in the motion that gets made at the actual town meeting. But it's not technically part of the town meeting.
It
Well,
doesn't
and-
deliver.
But it's part of the whole process. And there's no
And it's-
reason not to think of it.
And it's very fortuitous that Chris is here today, because the Weston Observer could play a very significant role in that by alerting people to what are the key things coming up that you might want to pay attention to over the week preceding town meeting, when all this deliberation is coming out.
But do you call it deliberation or questions and answers and discussion?
Well, we could call it, I don't know, call it.
It's called
Bill
discussion.
deliberation does sort of have the idea that somehow you're gonna come to a decision at the
Yeah.
end of it, but you said that decision is actually made at town meeting.
Well, it's.
But it's more that it's a process of education, awareness, learning.
But it could
clarification.
also be that amendments happen during that period, you know, that you start out at the beginning of the week with a warrant article.
Mhm.
And by Wednesday, somebody realizes, you know, that article really ought to say, we ought to change these 4 words to say X because of some.
That happens all the time with our warrants anyway.
Well, kind of, but.
What does?
All the time.
It happens.
Almost every planning article
It's changed.
is finally voted on at town meeting in a different form than was printed in the warrant.
Right,
It might be subtle, it might be smaller, it might be big.
Right, but a lot of that is driven by, they didn't get their act together a month before when the warrant was printed to get it right, and they've still worked on it until 3 days.
So who are you
before
talking
town
about
meeting.
doing the amendments?
So
So,
it could be anybody who's involved in the thing. It could,
No,
so-
but an amendment has to be voted on.
At town
well, that's
meeting,
the,
right?
that's the point, which is, you know, if
So,
I'm not saying it should or it shouldn't, I'm just saying it's something that you think about if.
but the only thing that would happen here is that whoever is presenting it saying, we are first presenting an amendment to what was printed in the warrant. And then we're going to ask you to vote on the amended article if it's approved.
Well, and typically what happens too is that there's an article and then a motion is made under the article. In some institutions, in some communities, the article is the motion, but not for us. For us, the article is the article.
It's
And-
the starting.
And a
point.
motion can be made under that article as long as what's being proposed by motion is within the scope of the article. If the article itself sufficiently warns people that a motion like this could be considered by town meeting, and you should show up if you care. And
Yeah.
that includes the budget, for example.
I would say it's an opportunity. In general, I would say there's an opportunity for government to do that.
I would suggest that as a way of shortcutting our consideration of this process, that some subset of us take a look at Concord and where Concord came out on the voter preparation piece and the discussion, however you want to term it, discussion, deliberation, whatever it is, this happens in advance of town meeting day. And how people are involved.
How involved people are.
Yeah,
Like, what does that look like?
for them, it's there's more involvement than there is at the planning board's public hearing on a particular zoning bylaw.
So Rip, don't you have to give the moderator a lot more authority just to cut people off at the actual town meeting? Because if you have this deliberation period and then you allow any question and any during the deliberation at town meeting, why would you show up early and in the early deliberation when you really want one that everyone's listening to? You have to be able to, as a moderator, to be able to cut people off and say that's already been part of the discussion that preceded this meeting, or some such authority.
Yeah, kind of like an asked and answered thing.
But
Yeah, the moderator,
if I did go to that early deliberation and I show up at town meeting and I have a question and the moderator says, sorry, you didn't go to those meetings, deliberations,
I
discussions.
know, it's hard.
I would come after you.
well, I'm gonna say that the moderator has more authority than you'd like to believe. And different moderators exercise that authority, more or less strictly. The moderator can tell people to shut up and can be rude, and most are.
But would never be rude.
Well, some, but I don't think the moderator can say, I'm sorry, your question's out of order because that question was asked at the meeting 2 weeks ago. You can't do that.
No.
But you can always say to somebody, you cut them off politely and say, that point's been made 3 times already. I just want to.
Tonight.
Yeah, and the more you harp on that point, Bob Buchanan used to do this beautifully. He would say, if you say it again and again and again, the more times you say it, more people you're going to lose.
Wonderful
And
job.
pretty soon people are irritated at you.
Yeah.
I vote against it because they're irritated.
I do that.
What do we have here? We have 10 minutes here. They said we couldn't have got at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Michael, what's your sense of, like, if you had to hypothesize right now, what's the answer to all this that we're going to write up in October for, our November or December deadline? What's your 3-minute summary of what we're going to say? Or we,
I'm not prepared to give that, I'm afraid, but I do think Rip's suggestion that we look at some of these subtopics and say, okay, you two look at this one in a little bit more detail and think of it as taking other town examples and coming up with what would be your recommendation so that we can, as a group, start to work on recommendations of, I'm calling them subtopics, which will eventually form the overall report and the overall, addressing the overall topic that we're charged with. So for example, the representative town government, what other little towns have tried it? What have been the positives and negatives? What are the feelings, if there is data, how do town members react? And are there unique characteristics to Weston that would make it more or less appropriate for our town government? Sorry, I completely avoided your question.
I noticed.
good job.
Good policy.
Okay.
I would say, I'll throw my 3 cents in. I would look at Concord's report and I would ask myself, what's wrong about this? And if it wasn't wrong, I would adopt that view, I think. If I wanted to know more about what backed up that report, I would look at the enormous amount of work they did to collect what other towns had done and analyze that. And those folks had something like 45 or 50 meetings.
Yeah.
And they had sub-reports after sub-reports after sub-reports. You can go to town on this, Chris. There's a ton of material there. And it's very well done. Might disagree with it, but they did a very good job.
So are you saying that our assignment for next time is we each individually will go through Concord, their recommendations,
What,
and put down how we feel about each of those recommendations.
what was their recommendation? What was their overall recommendation? I mean, I read it, but you know,
They had a series of them, a lot of them, several of them related to voter preparation. You know, better utilization of the local newspaper, these pre-meeting discussions, putting out a more general and comprehensive town meeting book 2 weeks before the meeting that reflected not just the limited material we have in here, but also in a larger and friendlier format for people who are old and have trouble reading all this stuff. The reports of various committees, the positions of other committees on the propositions that were being put forward, the specific motions that were anticipated. It required getting out ahead of things a little bit more than we do in Weston, right? And they have their town meeting is a little bit later in the, they go more towards the end of that.
did they recommend or not recommend voter participation, assuming that they could get the legislature?
They recommended that the town file out a home rule petition seeking permission to do remote participation in virtually the same language as what Wayland has been doing. That's fine.
But we don't know of the changes they implemented, what effect that had, correct? That's what we want to find out.
We do know quite a bit.
Oh, we know.
They made recommendations that they were stood up in May, I think. They had made recommendations in the fall about a number of things, including the use of clickers, or consider the aggressive use of the consent agenda, a more strict limitations on speaking. I mean, I think we adopted 10 years ago, 5 minutes for individual speakers and 5 minutes for presentations.
Right, but so we can say that for us, that those things have shortened town meeting, shortened the
Yes,
and that seems to be well received by the town.
yes.
So that's what I would like to say in Concord. They've done better voter preparation.
Yep.
Has the outcome been better decision making? I have no idea how you measure that.
I don't think I should.
So actually, probably actually recommended this, but I think that actually is a good idea, which is if each one of us for the next meeting, just as we all now went through this MMA thing,
Yeah.
we go through the Concord report and outline the major recommendations, not every single little nitpicky thing, but here were their 12 recommendations.
And what you like and what you don't like.
And
Yeah.
and 2 or 3 bullet points on each one of what we each individually like it, didn't like, or I agree, I disagree. I like this part of it, but I don't think this is workable, whatever. Then we can have a discussion next week, or you can have a discussion. I will put mine together and I'll send it to you, or I'll send it to everybody. I'll put together that, 1-page chart, basically a 1-page chart.
Yeah.
What are the 10 issues? And here are 2 or 3 bullet points on each one about things to think about.
Yes, no.
Yes, no, yes, this is not, I don't think this would work in Weston, whatever.
But I.
How about ranking them? How about ranking them?
Or even ranking them if that's important.
Yeah, I would want to know what their.
What do you
experience
think are the most important of these that we should think about? Because there may be some limits
is.
to our ability to implement them all.
And in fact, what they've discovered is it's not that great, or vice versa. But I have a question,
How long
because
ago-
you talk about better decision making.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is. What do you mean by that? We want better decisions.
Well,
Are our decisions bad?
we're running out of time, and the answer is yes. Okay, it's my experience with Weston town government for the past 35 years is, and especially the last 10 years, is absolutely yes.
We make bad
I can
decisions.
give you at least a handful of discussion of just examples.
Or we can say, what you think is a better decision, I think is a bad decision. I mean, that's the
Well,
question.
Well, no, I think the things that I would say are a bad decision, you also on reflection would say are a bad decision. But the way I would get at that and say, how do you get to a better decision is by, if you think about the decision as not in a single event, but rather a process that has steps and you think about what should be happening in each one of those steps, and you can disaggregate the process to a level where you can say, yes, that step is being done well, that step is being done okay, that step is being done not very well at all, and here are some potential reasons why.
I would like to explore this notion further, because I can tell you, like in a product development, a company, you know, you can do a study that says cross-functional teams, cross-national teams, cross-cultural teams, having different input leads to a decision where our products come out faster, they are better received in the market. You can measure all those things. For town government, I'm not sure what that is. I'm not, and we're not gonna have this discussion now, but that's, I think, because that's part of what
Well,
we're
here-
going for, is for a town meeting to be more effective and efficient. I'd like
Let
to
me
know
give you-
the target, have an
Okay,
understanding what the target is.
let me give you 3 examples of some decisions or decision areas that are, I think, unquestionably deficient. And then we can talk about the process that led to those decisions. So one is the first decision that the select board presented, I can't remember, it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, to replace the Paynes Hill water tank with a different water tank that's basically the same size but newer, in the same place. And it got voted down, and the select board member who presented it flipped out. Okay, but in 3 or 4 years of subsequent work, it basically, with a lot of extra money spent on engineering and discussion and engagement with the butters and so on, they came up with a completely different solution that had to do with larger tanks, all 3 tanks, and at a different level, which you could then never get to if you had built the Paynes Hill tank the way it had been recommended in the first place. So my observation with that is the process that led to the first recommendation, the decision was actually correct to vote down that proposal, but whatever the process was that led up to that faulty recommendation was improved in the subsequent process that led to a better recommendation.
So I heard that at town meeting made a good decision.
They
And had
did,
a good
but
decision.
they could have blown it and made the decision to build that tank, and then we would have been stuck for 100 years with a crappy water system. Okay. Another example is if you actually look at the school spending per pupil, and you can look at 100 different metrics and compare us to all the neighboring towns that are affluent like us, Wayland, Concord, Lincoln, Sudbury, Wellesley, and so on. Our numbers in the number of categories are completely out of the realm of reality in a bad way. And there's something about the budget process and the way we do the budget process and make the annual budget decisions that is not working properly, where we end up with that result.
So then the bad decision would be that the school budget gets approved.
Well, and actually that is one of the major dimensions of it, correct? All right. And I could go on. I've studied this at great length, but
I'm actually, because I just want to understand, like, it's,
but if
you
you
know, if I
you were to
can't
think
measure
about
it, if I can't know what the target is, I
Right.
can't make it.
But if you think, but you need to think about it as a process and who's involved in each step of the way and how that process operates, as opposed to the decision as a point event. That's
No,
And
no,
I,
that,
I'm,
but I just
and
hear that.
I'm sorry, I got to interrupt because I have to leave. Can we just agree on the assignment for next week? We're gonna look at, and I think if I leave, we are no longer a quorum.
well, we're
But-
gonna wrap up here.
But I'm leaving too.
But it seems to me the assignment is for each of us to go over the Concord recommendations, to rank ours and to think about comments on each. And I would also add and think about financial implications, because there may be a lot more staff or a lot more volunteer that, some of the implications of the implementation of those ideas that we like.
I agree. Okay,
That sounds like a plan to me.
I go to adjourn.
Are you-
Second.
Are you moving to?
I'm moving to
there's a-
adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Discussion?
Nope.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry, I didn't mean to kick you all out, but thank you.
It's a long day for me. It's
Thank you very much. Ending the meeting.
Thanks.
I've never in my whole life got while driving a warning through my GPS that says immediate threat. Do not travel unless you are actively escaping floodwater.
Wow.
New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
It's
Here's the-
Maureen, my wife got that this morning, and
God, where was I gonna go? Like,
I've gotten it once on a business trip in Houston, where there really are active floods that kill people. But bizarre, huh?
correct. They got 5 inches of rain in New Jersey.
Wow.
Yesterday, and today,
Bye, goodbye.
Bye.
all the flights, everyone who's on a flight to
Thanks, Matt.
Boston, it was
Thank you all.
they were.
Michael, get out of here.
Take care.
Yeah, I think that.
Okay.